Hello intellectuals. This is Nirmal, the instructor of the course. Let me tell you something right off the gate. As the name rightly suggests, this course is the quintessential guide for cracking JavaScript interviews for developers anywhere in the world. What that means is that I have gathered all my 23 plus years of experience in the programming industry and crafted a clean and crisp course for you to understand what kind of questions are asked in the interviews, their logical explanations with prominent examples, along with several ways that topic or question can be asked and answered. In my entire career span, I have taken so many interviews and screenings that you can't even imagine. That's what my role as a CTO with an NJ-based US company is. Find the right talent for our clients, and we do it pretty well than others. I also am the founder and CEO of a tech development company in India. I have been an active corporate trainer for years now and have been consulting with top tech companies. Now the first question I would have asked if I were you is, why is this course different from the others? Why invest in this course? Well, I must tell you, there are a lot of resources in the online world which you can refer to, but what I am doing here is something unique. We are going to discuss and understand what sort of questions are asked in the interviews with their proper explanations. So by the end of this course, you will not only get the knowledge about the concept, but also know how that question will be asked in a real interview session. No matter how prepared you are, if you do not understand the question, chances are someone else might get the role. The reason we are doing this with JavaScript is because it is one of the most important and commonly used programming language on earth. Even server-side developers are more likely to use it than any other language. Every year, there are hundreds and thousands of JavaScript job openings, and trust me, you need to have up-to-date knowledge to become the best in the business. We will go over JavaScript concepts such as language fundamentals, arrays, object-oriented JavaScript, DOM and web-related concepts, asynchronous JavaScript, map, set, weak set, kind of ES6 data structures, automated testing, and also practical real-world examples, and the list goes on. This course is as real as an actual interview because all the concepts or topics discussed here are asked in JavaScript technical interviews across the globe. The ideal student for this course is anybody who wants to excel with modern JavaScript. It is designed in such a way that each and every individual, be it a fresher or an intermediate to expert level candidate, will get maximum benefit out of this. Basic knowledge of CSS HTML is desirable but not mandatory. Let me also remind you that JavaScript is a kind of language which keeps on updating, and there are always new things coming. So this course is an absolute progressive course, and the questions and the concepts are added on a very regular duration. Feel free to check out the course description, and I look forward to seeing you inside. Thank you. In this section, we are discussing a question, that is, what is the difference between null and undefined? The category is the JavaScript language itself, and we will see three relative questions which we can relate to this topic. Alright, so in all programming languages, you see null values, but JavaScript is unique in this case. It has both undefined and null, and believe me, it's really confusing for even experienced developers. So let's begin with undefined. Most of the languages have data types for variables. JavaScript also has, but at the time of variable declaration, there is no type decided. Then after the value is assigned to a variable, it decides the data type. So before any value is assigned to a variable in JavaScript, the variable contains undefined. Let's run a sample code to understand it with more clarity. Let's say I declare a variable x and I will simply try to display the value. Not only that, I'm going to also display the type of X. Type of is a kind of operator which gives you the type of the variable, that is the data type of a variable. Let's run the code and see what happens. As you see that the value of X is undefined and the type of X is also undefined. So undefined is a data type as well in JavaScript, because the X doesn't have any value at this moment. The value, of course, it will display is undefined, but the data type is also undefined. Let me just assign a value to X and I will rerun the code. Now you see that in the first case it displays the value, and in second case it says it's a number now. So when you do not have any value assigned to a JavaScript variable, then it is going to be undefined. Now let's talk about null. Null is exactly the same as other programming languages. Null means nothing. When you have a variable or object which you want to make empty, then you assign null to a variable. Say for example, let X is equal to null. I will display the value of X here. So certainly it's going to display that the value of X is null. The most amazing thing here is if I have another variable which contains undefined, just in case, and if you try to compare with equality operator, I'm not saying strict equality, right? 3 equal to is strict equality in JavaScript, which checks both value and data type. But here we are using simply the comparison. Now if I run the code, it says true, because both undefined and null represent nothingness, but they contain different data type, because undefined and null are different in terms of data type. So if I use the strict equality operator, you will see that now it says that it is false. Let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question can be, what is undefined in JavaScript? So which you already know now, that a variable which is not assigned a value is undefined. The second question can be, what will be the output of undefined double equal to null and undefined strict equality null? So we already know that when you compare undefined and null with 2 equal to signs, that is simple comparison, it's going to return true, and with 3 equal to sign, that is strict equality, it's going to say false, because it also checks the data type. And as I mentioned, undefined itself is a data type. Null is a primitive data type. Null is not an object. Null is a primitive data type. In case if you are using type of operator with null, it displays object, but that is actually incorrect from the beginning in JavaScript. Null is treated as a primitive data type. Third question, can you explicitly assign undefined to a variable? Now here when I say explicitly, that means, can I assign a value undefined to a variable? Yes, you can, because undefined itself is a kind of keyword which you can use. Let me show you by example. I can say let X is equal to undefined. So when you say undefined, remember I'm not using any single quotes or double quotes, right? Otherwise it will be a string. But directly when you say undefined, that means X actually is undefined, though we don't need that. But in case when you want to compare a value, that the value is undefined or not, then this keyword is useful for you, right? So here I can say X just to show what is the value. So it will be undefined. So these are the few tricky topics, null and undefined, which commonly are asked when you go for interviews. In this section, we are discussing a very basic question, that is the difference. In this section, we are discussing a very basic question, that is the difference between function scope and block scope. The category is the JavaScript language, and there are 3 relative questions which can be asked with this topic. So before we start discussing the difference between function and block scope, we must understand what is the scope of a variable. Now the scope can be of a variable and function, so the logic remains same. When I say scope of a variable, That means it is a lifetime or availability of a variable. For example, if you declare a variable in one function, then it won't be available in the other function. Let's try with an example. I'm going to define a function A and declaring a variable in it. Now I have another function B, and I'm trying to display the value of x. Let's try to call both A and B. Here when we run the code, it is giving an error that x is not defined. That is, x is not available because variable x is declared in function A and I'm trying to access or refer to it in function B. This means the scope of a variable x is limited to function A. In other words, variable x is local to function A. Scope of a variable can be local or global. At the moment, variable x is local to function A. Let's make the variable x global. Global variable will be accessible for all functions. And to make a variable global, we declare it outside all the functions. This variable I'm going to declare above function A. Now I'm changing the value. I'm adding 5 to variable x in function A, and then I'm referring value of x in function B. Let's run the code. So now the output is 15. Both function A and B are referring to the same variable. So x is global and available to the entire piece of code. Now coming to the discussion of difference between function scope and block scope. ES5 has function scope, and that is because of hoisting, but ES6 does not have hoisting. Remember, if you are declaring a variable with var keyword, then hoisting will be there. Let's try to understand the term hoisting and block scope separately. We will begin with hoisting. Let's say we have a variable called variable x. Now if I try to display this variable before it is declared, let me first of all try some other variable which is not existing anywhere in the code. If I run this, it says that y is not defined. There is a problem because y is not existing. Now on this line 1, what if I say x? This also doesn't exist on this line, but still if I run this code, instead of giving any error, it says it is undefined. Let me also try to assign a value to variable x, and I run it again. Then also it says undefined. The reason is that internally the JavaScript compiler finds all the variable declarations which are declared with the var keyword, and it brings all the declarations. Remember, only the declaration and not the assignments. So internally what happens? Internally it actually says var x like this, and internally it will be something like this. So naturally it has to show undefined at this point. Remember, I am showing you in this code window, but this actually happens internally behind the scene, so you do not see it. Earlier, when JavaScript was introduced, there was no specific way of writing the language. It was not very rigid about rules of declaring variables. At that time, the compiler used to search through entire function and it used to bring all the declarations on top. That means if you have declared, let's say var x somewhere in the function here, and you have 10 lines after that, you have one more var x just in case, right? Even though there is a curly bracket, that is there is a block, right? Let's say you have a for loop. Imagine that you have a for loop and there you have declared variable x once again. What will happen? The feature of hoisting will search through entire code in the function for that function only. Remember, only for one function, for each function. It will search through all the variables, right? And it will bring it on top. So what happens here? X comma x. X also comes on top. So at a time in ES5, that is with var keyword, you can declare only one variable in a function. This is what hoisting is. Hoisting means it is bringing the declaration on top, not the assignment. So if you have var x is equal to 9, 9 remains there only. So this is about variable hoisting, right? Now let's talk about block scope. Block scope is introduced from ES6 onwards, and we are using the let keyword there. So for example, I have to declare, let's say, let x is equal to 9. Now again, I am having a block which is just a curly bracket. You may have an if condition, you may have a for loop, doesn't matter. Even just like this, curly brackets, that's also a block. Now I declare let x, the same name I am using, and saying that, let's say 8. So now there are two different values also. Let me also refer the value. So I'll say console log x, right? So we have the same name in the same scope, in the same function. And if I run this is running absolutely fine, because the let keyword doesn't do hoisting. The JavaScript compiler doesn't hoist variables declared with the let keyword, right? So we do not use var keyword anymore, but still if you are using var keyword, hoisting will happen, right? So here we have variable x declared in the same scope, and it is working fine because it's not going to be hoisted on top. The way we tried with hoisting, let's say I display the value of x and then I declare x, right? If I do this, see what happens. It says it cannot access x before initialization. Now it is not showing undefined. So hoisting is not happening here. So now you know what is block scope and what is variable hoisting. Or you can say function scope, because when hoisting is there, you have function scope, that is one variable for each function. You cannot have another variable with same name in ES5 or with var keyword. Let's discuss about relative questions of this topic. Question 1, there can be a question that what is hoisting? We have already discussed that it is about a process which is happening behind the scene. We do not see that. As a developer, as an end user, we do not see that. Internally, it is bringing the declarations on top. That's what hoisting is. The second question is, how does block scope work? So we have already seen that a block scope is nothing but the brackets. Anyway, you put it, whether it is an if condition, for loop, do while, or even just curly brackets you put, that is a block created, and that creates a separate world, separate scope for those declarations existing in that particular block. The third question can be, what is scope of a variable? So scope is nothing but the availability or visibility or lifetime of a variable. So this is all about variable scope, hoisting and block scope. Now we are going to discuss another concept called generators. So this topic will have 5 relative questions. Generators can help you to pause and resume the code. That is the simple definition of generator functions. Let's get clear with generators in the most simplified way. Normally when you write a function, it returns a single value. You can think of generators as a kind of function which can return multiple values in phases. Enough of definition, let's try practically. The function star is the keyword used to define a generator function. Yield is an operator which pauses the generator. Yield also helps to receive input and send output. But that is the next phase. At the moment, let's use function asterisk, keyword and yield operator to get the idea of basic functionality of generator function. So let's define a generator function. I'll say const, for example, gen function, that is generator function. I'll say function. This is absolutely fine. Now the difference is you put a star here. Sometimes you will see that people get confused with putting this star. Some people write like this or like this. All the ways are correct, but most of the commonly used way with generator functions is that we use the star along with the function and then we put a space. But even if you do not have a space, right, then also it's fine, and if you have this star with this bracket, that's also not a problem. I'm just writing a statement here saying console log. Let's say I want to display hello. Then I just write yield. The moment you write this yield operator, it means this is where the function will pause. I'll explain you with some illustration, but let's proceed further. Another statement I want is hello, then the world statement. Again, I just want to have the yield operator, and next I'll put a console log. I'll add one more statement, and let's say galaxy. Now how am I going to call the function? I will create an object, let's say generator object is equal to, I'm calling the generator function. Now if you see this line number 8, when a generator function is called, it does not call the function. Instead, it returns a generator object. So the GOBJ here you see will receive the generator object. Let's try to display the value of it. I'll say console log, the generator object value I want to see. I'll run the code. I'll say node generator.js. So you can imagine that you are still here. Now there is another method called next method, which will start the execution and will continue till the yield operator. When it reaches to the yield operator, that's where it is going to stop. Let's try to put a next statement now. I'll remove this console log as it is not needed. I'll say gobj.next. Let's run this. So it has executed the first statement, and then when it found the yield operator, it stopped the execution. The next method actually returns an object which has two keys, which we have already seen with the iterator. The first is value and the other is boolean, which shows the next status. Let's try to print value of next method. Either I take the value in some variable, I can say some object, const o is equal to, we want to check what the next returns. So I'll say console log the value of o. Let's run the code. So hello is executed, and then when it found the yield operator, it stopped and it returned the object like this, value and the status done. As you see that the value is undefined. The reason is at the moment I have not returned any value with yield, which you can by giving a value along with the yield. Say for example, I just want to try yield value. It might be any value which you are returning. So yield itself is capable of returning any value. Let's try this. I'll save, run it. Now as you can see here, the value says that it is yield value, which was undefined earlier, and the status is still false. Now if you want to execute this entire function, because there are two yield operators written here, so we'll have to write multiple next methods. Let's do that. Again I'll say gobj.next. I want to move to the next yield. Even what we can do here is we can directly console log and also move to the next yield. So we do not need to write more lines here now. So this will also move to the next yield and will also display the returned value of the next method call. Let me write 3 times here, or even 4 times. Now let's run the code. The first hello is executed here. Then comes the returned value by this next method. Again we write the next, so it's going to move further. When it goes on third next, it is going to execute this and galaxy. And for the last next, I've just added for the sake of adding it, just to show that there is no value getting returned for the last next. Let me remove this now. Again we try the same code. So this is the output. Inside this generator function, we are moving step by step with the next method. Now this next method we have already seen in the iterator section. It means generators are iterable as well. So instead of writing this next, what we can do, which is a more preferred way, we are going to put an iterator here. When I say iterator, I'm going to put a for of loop. I'll say for, let's say let O of GOBJ, which is the generator object. Now here I'll simply try to display the value of O. Let's run the code. Now you see that instead of writing the next methods multiple times, you put the loop, that is for of loop, and you can iterate through the entire generator function. Isn't it fantastic? And because here you see that generator functions are iterables, you can use the spread operator with it as well. So instead of writing like this, say for example, even I do not want the for loop and you want the results inside an array, what you can do is you can directly display the value of this generator object, which will not be a generator object later on when I put this inside the array. So whatever the generator function is going to return, because it is iterable, you can use the spread operator with it. So this will actually create an array with returned values. All returned values by this generator function will be assigned to this GOBJ. So now this is a kind of array. So let's try this also. I'll clear the screen first and run the code again. So now you see that this entire GOBJ contains the values which the generator function was returning. In the iterator section, we tried a code sample to iterate through an object literal. Generator works best with iterators. This was the code we tried with iterator, where we created a method with symbol iterator key and we returned the iterator object to iterate through a non-iterable data structure. The same code we can convert with generators, and that will be even easier. So like this OBJ, we have start and end. Of course, this system iterator is needed, but we are going to convert this into a generator function, and that's it. This actually converts this entire system iterator method as iterable because now it is a generator function. So what I can do, I do not need all this ITR and anything like this. Even I do not need to return this object as well. Instead of this, you can simply put a for loop here, and let's say let counter is equal to this dot start number. The counter should go till end and the counter will be incremented by 1. The next thing you need is that you are going to yield the counter. That's it. So now you can compare the code which we wrote like this for iterator, and now we have this code where it is going to iterate through this non-iterable data structure. Let's try this and see what is the output. The for loop will remain as it is. So now you can see that this thing is iterable just with the help of generator functions. In fact, to make this syntax easier, you can certainly remove this function keyword, and this star you can put before the symbol iterator, and you can follow the ES6 syntax. That's also fine. This is even better. Let me save and rerun just to check whether everything is working fine or not. And here also, instead of writing the for loop, you can use, let's say you have the OBJ. This is the object which we have made iterable. Now see the most amazing thing here. I'll directly say console log ... spread operator I'm using OBJ. That's it. So this is an array where you have the entire list of values. So now we know that generators are really working well with iterators because generators are iterable as well. The yield operator which we are using is something we can use only in generator functions. When it comes to recursive function or even calling one generator function from another, there is a specific syntax, that is by using yield and asterisk like this. Let's try a code sample. I will create a generator function. I'll say function star generator. Right now I'm putting just a statement here saying that hi. Now I am creating another generator. Let's say function star generator 1. Ideally, when you have to call this generator, that is this one, you will use const, let's say the generator object is equal to, the function name is generator. Then you will say g dot next. So you are actually calling the generator function, because we know that if it is a generator function, we need to move the function pointer using the next method. Now if you call this generator 1, that is, I'll say g1 is equal to generator 1 and g1 dot next. Now if you look at the architecture of this code, we have two generator functions here, and the generator 1 is actually calling the generator function here. Let's run the code first. I'll say node generator.js. So here this line is executed. In case if you want to call this function directly, then you have another syntax as well. That is, you can use the yield function and you put an asterisk here. Then you say gen. This will help you to call the generator function. As you can see that the function is executed. If you had to write the yield outside any generator function, it is not allowed, because yield is something which you have to put inside a generator function. But here, this situation can be very well handled with yield asterisk, and then you give the generator function. In case if you have a recursive function, now let me just show you one simple syntax of recursive function. Let's say I have a function called factorial. Now what is a recursive function? A recursive function is that you may have some if condition here, and then you may want to write some exit statement, that is to terminate the execution, and here you will call the factorial function. So right now what we are doing is that we are calling the factorial function from the function itself. It's a kind of endless execution unless you put the if in a proper way. So this is a recursion. Now in this case also, if you want to call, let's say this is a generator function, assume that this is a generator function, then you can use the yield and star. Of course, in that case also you need to have proper conditions to come out of the execution. So in case if you want to call the generator function from another one, or you are implementing recursion with generator functions, then you can use the yield and asterisk syntax. The generator object has next method, which we have already seen, which returns object like this. It also has two other methods, return method and throw method. Return method is more or less similar to the next method, but it returns the object like this, where you have the value and done will always be true, and it terminates the generator. So return method is used to terminate the generator here. Let's try this. I'll create one generator function. Sorry, I missed the generator, that is the asterisk. Now let's say yield. I'll return straight away 1 and another yield. I'll say 2. Now I'll create the generator object. Let's try this. Console log generator object dot next. At the moment I'll try with next method only. So I'll write the next method 3 times. Let me do that. And we are straight away displaying the returned value by the next method. Let's run this. Now you see that for the first 2 next methods, because we have already seen the execution, that once you write this statement, the pointer is here. When you say the next method, it moves to the next value. So this is executed because yield is something which pauses the execution. Then the second next will move to the next line. The last next is going to say that now done is true and there is no value returned because there is no yield for this next. Now you see that the done true is displayed at the last next method call. Let me just say return here. I'll save this and run it again. Now if you compare the output here, in the second call itself, it says that the value is undefined and done is true. It means that on the second call, because we have used the return method, it has terminated the generator, right? And it has made this done is equal to true. So now there is no more further execution possible. The same thing if I write here on the first line, let's say return here, and I'll put next here. Doesn't matter whether I write next or not, but let's write it. Now as you can see, all three times there is no value returned by yield because the generator function is terminated on the first call itself. So if you have a situation where you have a condition and then you want to come out of the generator function, you want to terminate the generator function, you can write the return. In fact, you can give a message also. Next method also takes a parameter if you want. Same way you can say that, let's say there was a condition satisfied and you wanted to come out of the generator. I'll just say condition done or satisfied, whatever. I'll just save this. So now you see the value is condition done and done is true. So this is how return is useful to deal with termination of generator function. Now in this example, we have already seen that we can terminate the generator function using return. You can also suspend the termination if you are using finally and you use the yield statement in it. Let me show you practically, then you will have a clear understanding. Let's say I have a try block here and the yield statements are placed inside this try. Here I am going to use finally. Now I just use yield and I will return finally here, just to get the idea that this is actually returned by the finally yield. Now here I have this GOBJ. I'll say GOBJ.next. Let me also put a console log here so that I get the output. So the first is the next statement. The second line I'm going to write is again the next statement. Let's run this and see what is the output. So both the cases it says done is equal to false. Let me comment this yield at the moment and here I'm going to write return. Let's try it again. So now what happens? First case done is equal to false. The second case it says done is true. The reason is we have used the return statement which terminates the generator. Now if I just uncomment this line and if I run, you see the second one is not yet terminated. The value is finally. This shows that the yield statement of finally is executed and done is still not true. That means the suspension is executed. When I wrote this yield in finally, the return method's termination is suspended. So this is another syntax which you can use sometimes when the termination is to be suspended. The next method we are discussing is the throw method. The throw method throws an exception at the location of yield which made the last suspension in the generator function. It means that, for example, in this case, instead of writing finally, I'll just put a catch here and let's say error object, and instead of having a yield statement, now I'll say console log and display the error, whatever the error is. So I'm going to join the error ERR. That's it. Now instead of this return statement, I'll use just a throw statement, throw method that is, which will throw the error. And as you see that the first next did return this object, but then because we have the throw, right? Now see here return or throw which I have shown, this is just an example or a syntax or how does it work. That's what I am discussing, right? You have to correlate it with some practical situation. We are also going to see few situations where we'll be using it. But at the same time, you have to understand that when I use the throw statement, that means if there is an error condition, I'm going to write throw or maybe return. But all these methods will be in a kind of if condition or in some situation only we are going to use it, right? So there will always be an if condition, maybe switch case where you see that if certain values are or conditions are not satisfied or maybe satisfied, then you want to terminate or generate the error. As long as error is concerned, anyway, whenever there is an error generated by a try catch which you generally use to handle the JavaScript errors, that's where you can have the generator function object dot throw method. In this section we have just seen the syntax of generators and how generators are working with iterators also. as long as the practical implementation is concerned, I would like to underline this, that generator functions are rarely used in your JavaScript code. But yes, there are situations where you have the asynchronous processes where iterators and generators combined, they can work well. And to see how generators and iterators with asynchronous processes work, you can check the asynchronous section where I have discussed asynchronous iterators and generators concept. Let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, what are generator functions? Explain the syntax. So generator functions, we have seen that they give you a way where you can pause a process, and then whenever you want to continue further after some time even, then it's possible. The syntax is like this, where we are using an asterisk with the function, and we use the yield operator to pause the execution and next method to proceed further. The second question is, which is the right syntax? Function asterisk then space, or function then space and asterisk? See, we have already seen earlier in the beginning that whether you write space after the star, before the star, or even if you don't give a space in between, that is the function parentheses star and brackets, you do not give any space, doesn't matter, right? All these syntaxes are valid, but at the same time I would just like to emphasize that function star space is the commonly used syntax. So we go with this way of writing the generator function. The third question is, explain all methods of generator object. So the three methods which we have discussed, the next method, which actually moves the function pointer to the next line, from the next, that is the last suspended yield, it proceeds further. Whereas the return allows you to terminate the function, and the throw method, which can help you to raise an error with the generator object. So these are the three methods related to the generator object. The fourth question is, explain the use of yield star, that is yield asterisk. So we have seen that it's about calling generator function from another generator function, or even when you have to call a recursive generator function, then you have to use the yield star syntax. The fifth question is, can you prevent return from terminating the generator? Yes, absolutely. Of course, there should also be a conditional way to deal with this situation, but when you say return, it terminates the execution. But let's say if you write a yield statement in finally like this, then it will certainly prevent the return from terminating the generator. This question is about searching an element in an array. The question is, how do you perform search operation in an array? The category is of course arrays, and there will be 5 relative questions about searching elements in array. Searching elements in an array is a very common task in programming. JavaScript gives various methods to perform search. We will begin with 3 methods: index of, last index of, and includes. The syntax of index of is like this. That is an array name you specify and you apply the index of method. It takes 2 parameters. The first is search element, that is the element you want to search or the value you want to search, and the start index is optional, which denotes the beginning index. If it is given 0, it will search from the beginning, but default is 0, so you don't need to specify if you want to search in the entire array. This method returns index number where the item is found. If search element does not exist in the array, then it will return -1. And if there are more than 1 matches found, it will return the index of the first item found. The last index of is similar in terms of syntax, but it returns the last index of the found element. Otherwise, it is very similar to index of. If start index is given, it will search from the index. By default, start index is array length -1. The syntax of includes is something like this. Includes is also one similar method like index of, but it returns Boolean value, that is true if element is found, otherwise false. These 3 are very common, very basic methods which we are going to try right now. Let's say we have this array which has few elements, few are repeating, like 1 is 3 times in the array. Now the first statement I'm going to try is console.log. The array name is ARR and I will say index of. What I want to search is, I want to search for value 1 in this array. Let's save this and run what it returns. Now you can see 1 is found on the 0th index, so it returns 0. By default, the start index is 0, so it has started searching from 0. Assume that I give that it should start from the second index number, that is 0, 1 and 2. From this position I want it to search, or let's say 3, that will be better. So from this 3, 0, 1, 2 and 3 is going to start. I'm saving this and running it again. So now you see that the 1 is found on the 5th position, so it has returned the index number 5. In case if I give, let's say, small o, then if we try to search it, it's not going to return the value, that is, it is going to return -1 because that value is not found. This also proves that index of search is case sensitive value. Let's change it to 1 again. Now we will try the last index of. In the very same case, I'll say last index of. Let's directly run this and see what happens. This also has returned 5. Why? Last index starts searching from array length -1. That is, if we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, that is total 7 elements. The last is the 6th element. So array length -1 will be 6 here. That will be the start of searching. Now let's say you want that it should search from this place, that is 0, 1, 2 and 3. So I can say here that start searching from 3. Remember that index number is calculated from the start, of course, but the search will go backward. So now if I search 0, 1, 2, 3, this is the place from where the search is going to be started, and it will go to search where is 1 in this entire array. Let's see what happens. It says 2. So 0, 1, 2. This is how the index of and last index of works. They return the index number of the found element. Whereas includes is very similar. In terms of parameters, you would see that it has the very same parameter. It is something like index of only, but instead of returning the element number, that is index number, it returns whether it is existing or not, it has found or not, that is true or false. So now if I save this, it's going to search from this place, that is the 4th place, 3rd index. Where will it find? It will find here. But it's not going to say the index number, but instead it will simply say whether is there any value found or not. Again, if I just change this to, let's say, any or something, I don't even need this index number. Let's see whether it finds it or not. It says false. That means the value is not there. So these 3 methods are an easier way to search. But there can be more complex searches like conditional search. For example, you have an array of salary and you want to get all elements where salary is more than 3000. Then you can use find method, find index method, or sometimes even a better method called filter. Let's directly jump into a practical example and later we will figure out the syntax. Let's say this is the array of salary. Now the syntax of find method is something like this. It is going to return something that we will see that return value is what. I'll say array.find. Now this takes a callback function. Like we have already seen in for each, that there is a callback function called for each element. Same thing is happening here. Now I can write function like this, or I can go with arrow function, but I prefer to go with arrow function. Here it is going to pass 4 parameters. The first is the element. That means each element is going to be passed in this argument. There can be an index number. There can be an array. This array is basically the array itself on which the find is applied. And there can be a this argument. All these are similar to for each. First of all, let's simply start with element. What we want to do is, we just want to return all the elements which are more than 3000. So if there is an element more than 3000, that is value 3000, that will be returned in rval. So I'm going to say return element more than 3000 and it will stop searching. And I'm adding this console log rval which is returned here. Now let's run this code and see what happens. It says 4500. That means it did find this value. There is something more than 3000, but it did not search further. In fact, this only finds one value and it stops the searching. The way we have find method, we do also have find index. This is absolutely same as the find method, but instead of returning the value, it returns the index number. Let's try this. You see that it returns the index number. But the problem with these two methods is it finds only one value at a time. Let's say you want to get all the values which are more than 3000. How will you do that? The best way is you use the filter method. Now the amazing thing with filter method is it doesn't return one value, it returns a new array, entire new array of found elements. So whichever element returns true with the condition, that is returned to a new array. A new array is filled with those values. Let's try this and see now what is the output. We are displaying the rval, but now rval, that is the returned value, is now going to be an entire array. You see this? These are the elements. This 1200 is not of it, right? This 1200 is less than 3000. So that is not returned. Only these three elements are part of rval. So a new array is created with the filter method. As long as the syntax is concerned, here is the syntax of find method. It takes a callback function and there is an element. There is an optional index number also. The array on which the find method is applied and the this argument which is a reference of the this object in the callback function. Now the same syntax is for all three methods, that is find, find index and filter. If there is no true value found in array, in case of find, it will return undefined. The same is the case with find index also. But if there is no value found with filter method, it is going to return an empty array. Let's say, for example, here in this case, I'll say 30,000. Is there any value more than 30,000? If no, then there won't be any value returned in an array, but it won't be undefined. You see this? This is an empty array. But instead of this, if I say find method, it will return undefined. So this can also be a question that what will be the output if there is no value returned in filter method or even find method. Now let's discuss the relative questions of this topic. The first question is, what is the difference between find and filter method? So we have seen that find returns only one value, that is the first match, and it stops searching, whereas filter returns a new array. The second question is, if there is no value to return, what will find index return? So like find index will also return undefined if there is no true value matched. The third question is, what is the difference between index of and includes method? So index of returns the index, whereas includes returns the true or false, that is a Boolean value. The fourth question is, how will you search multiple values in an array? So that's where filter method is useful. So you can talk about filter method in that case. And that is this piece of code, and the question can be, what will be the output of this code? Now here the last index of is applied and there is no such element ABCD in the array. If the element is not found, what should be the output? So in case of index of or last index of, -1 is the output if the element is not found. If you want to try, we can do that. I will say last index of here and trying to do something, trying to find something which is not at all there in the array. And if I run this, then the output is -1. So apart from these methods, there are many other methods or ways which you can implement to search elements in an array. But these are the most commonly used. Filter is one of those methods which is often used to find the array elements. Now in this section, we are going to discuss about the length property of a string and few search methods. Search methods we have already seen in a section called array, but similar methods we can use with string as well. Also, there will be 3 relative questions to this topic. Normally, properties or methods should be with objects, whereas string is a primitive type. But JavaScript primitive types, when executed, behave like an object. It means you do have properties and methods with these primitive types as well. The string type has a length property which returns the length, that is number of characters. Let's check an example. I'm going to declare a variable. I'll say let str is equal to, let's say, Anak Technologies. Now I'm going to say console log str.length. Now let's run this code. You see that it displays the number of characters. So length is a property which is always there with a string. As I mentioned earlier, normally properties are part of objects and this str is a primitive data type. But when executed, JavaScript treats this like an object and it allows to apply property like this. It also allows to apply methods. Let's talk about few methods of string. 2 methods, index of and last index of, search for a character or string within a string and returns the index number. For example, here, if I say let str is equal to, let's say this is a test, and now I'm going to say console log str.index of, and I'm going to search for is. Let me also use the last index of here. I'll say console log str.last index of, and here I'm going to say is. Now let's run this code. So in case of index of, it begins the search from the beginning, whereas last index of starts the searching from the end. So that's why you see the different values in the output. It shows the index number, that is the position on which is found by index of and last index of. These 2 methods return -1 if the value is not found, and you can also give the start position as well. Let me give 5 here with the index of. It means that it is going to start the searching from the 5th index. So the index number starts with 0. So from this position, it will start searching. And let me also say 4 here with last index of. Now when I say 4 here, it will start searching from the 4th position to the start, that is the beginning of the string, in this direction. Now let's run this code. Now you see that in the index of, it searches from the 5th position. So the second is searched, whereas in last index of, it searched for the first is. There is also a search method which does the same thing as index of, but with a difference. Let me just replace this index of with search. Now I'm removing this 5 and 4 as well. And I'm also removing this last index of. Let's run this. Now you see that with index of or this search method, the output seems same. But there are 2 main differences between search and the index of. Index of can have a start position to perform the search, like we have seen in this example. But index of cannot be used for advanced search operations like regex, whereas the search method can take regular expressions as well, but search method will not take this starting position which index of can take. So this is the fundamental difference between these 2. Let's discuss about the questions. The first question is, explain the index of and last index of method with syntax. So index of and last index of searches for the index number of the string given. You can also give the starting position here as a second parameter. So it will start searching from that position. Index of will search from beginning to end, whereas last index of will search from the end to the beginning of the string. The second question is, what is the difference between search and index of method? Index of can have a start position to perform the search, like we have seen in this example. But index of cannot be used for advanced search operations like regex, whereas the search method can take regular expressions as well, but search method will not take
this starting position which index of can take. So this is the fundamental difference between these two. And the third question is, what will be the output of the below given code? Explain with the reason. So the output is 5. The reason is index of is going to start the searching from the 5th position. It searches from this position and the first is found is actually on the 5th position of the string. So that's why it returns 5. In case of last index, because we are searching from the first position, that is, it will start searching from H and it will go in this direction, that is till the beginning of the string where it doesn't find any is, and because there is no string found, it returns -1. As we have already discussed that index of or last index of, in case of failure, that is in case of no string found, is going to return -1. This section of OOJS, we are discussing very important related questions of object literal. The main question is what is an object literal, and there will be 5 relative questions. There are many ways to create an object in JavaScript. There is also a class object, capital O, which can allow you to create an object. Here we are discussing the most essential way of object creation, and trust me, it's extremely important. In any case of object creation, the basic idea is that we are creating a container to bundle data pieces. Let's take a simple example. If we have a table on which we have pen, pencils, sharpeners, erasers, and 20 other things. Now, if you want to take all the things from one place to another, it's better that you have a box or a kind of container, so you put everything in it and shift it wherever you want to. Similarly, when you have different data pieces which you may want to pass to one function to another, or maybe you want to pass it to some server, then you bundle the data pieces in an object and pass it. So in a way, object actually allows you to create a container where you can put variables, even functions also. Let's take an example. You have product code, product name, price, and more fields, and you want to pass this data to a function. So the function might look like this, that you have function product and you have various parameters passed here. Instead of this, you can write something like this, that you have the object, put all the different pieces in one container. This becomes a container. We will see the syntax how we create it, but this is just a kind of illustration that how do we create an object and we pass the object in the function like this. So this is the whole idea of creating an object. Though there are many other advantages after creating this kind of container, but that discussion we keep it for some other day. At the moment, we are discussing all the relative questions and what is object literal. That is our main discussion. Object literal is simply a key value pair data structure. Let's take an example. I want to create an object literal. Normally, you may have different variables, for example, product code, product name, and so on. If I want to put everything inside object literal, how can I do that? To create the object literal, this is the syntax. If I say let or const obj is equal to curly brackets. If I do this, this means I have created an object literal. For example, I want to add variables to this object. Now remember, if I have product code is equal to 1001, for example, and I want to add this to the object, you just say obj.productCode. Also, I want to add one more variable to it. I will say Apple, for example. In case if you want to add a function to the object, that's also possible. Let's say I want to have get data. That is the function. And this function, I want that it should be part of the object, not as an independent function. So I can say object dot get data is equal to, you don't need to write this name. This is basically function expression. And here I can simply say console.log object.pcode and object.pname. That's it. Let's try to display the value of obj itself. I'll say node ojs.js. Now as you can see here, the object displays that it has two variables and one method. When I'm saying 3, what does it have? It has 3 members. The variable you put inside object is called as a property. So we have 2 properties, pcode and pname, and a function added to an object is called as method. So here we have total 3 members, 2 properties and 1 method. This is how an object literal is created. So now if you have to pass this object to some function, maybe on the server, the thing is you have created this container and you have placed these members in it. That is the advantage of creating an object literal. This is not actually the right way. Normally we do not create object literal like this. What we do in JavaScript, the common practice I mean, is that we place everything inside the object literal directly. We don't create an empty object and then we add it generally. But the syntax changes a bit if you put everything inside the object. So we do not need to write obj dot, because as such you are declaring those members inside the object itself. You do not write equal to sign to assign it. You use the colon sign. And you do not end the statement with a semicolon, that is you put a comma. This is the most commonly used way to create an object literal. We declare all the members inside the object itself. So now if I run, there is no change at all. It is the same thing. The only difference is now the code is shifted. That is the declaration of properties and methods, or one method in our case, is shifted inside the obj, that is the object. If you want to access individual members, as you must have observed in this code, that dot is the operator, right? Now I also want to add one more point here, which is introduced in ES6. The function, that is the method we have written here, is like this. That is, we have an equal to sign, that is assignment, in this case colon, but that is a kind of assignment only. So we say get data equals to function. In ES6, now you can avoid this syntax. You can simply write like this. This is a valid one. So now instead of writing any colon or equal to outside the object, you just write get data. That's it. This is how we define the methods in classes also, but that we are going to discuss in one of our forthcoming section. So let's try this code again to make sure that the output is same. As long as calling this method is concerned, we can simply say object.getData. That's it. And this will display us the data. There it is. The way we have created one object literal, we can also have n level of objects in it. For example, you want one more object after pcode. Let's say you want here that pcode also has maybe some ID and it also has second part, for example, the second part of the product code, maybe some character. So I just say ABC. So the thing is, whenever you want to create an object literal, you just open the curly brackets and you start writing. Important point here is that pcode is the key and the one which you are writing here is the value. Pname is the key, the one which you are writing here, like in this case apple is the value. So that's why we call object literal is key value pair data structure. If you know about JSON format, that's also key value pair. But the only difference is that the key is always inside double quotes when we talk about JSON. But we are not discussing JSON at the moment, but just for the reference that if you are comparing this object with JSON, or rather JSON is more used because of this format we have in JavaScript called object literal, right? So this is the object which helps to convert the JSON data to this format. So often we see that the JSON data which we receive is converted into object literal. Now I'm changing back this product code to 1001. I also mentioned one thing here, that ES6 has this format where we directly write get data. We don't write any colon, sign or function. We do not write arrow function for sure, remember. That also we are going to discuss in one of the question, why we should not use arrow function inside object literal. To be on a safer side, if you are using this object, then I do not recommend the arrow function in it. But that we will discuss in one of our next questions. Here in ES6, there is also one more facility provided, and that is about giving the dynamic key values. Imagine that this P code or P name, for example, is not decided earlier. Maybe some data is retrieved and then that key is decided. So this key I want to make dynamic. Now let's say I create a variable here. I say let temporary variable is equal to, I name P code here, right? And if I say TV here, that is temporary variable, right? Let's see what happens. If I run this, it says undefined. So there is some problem with it, right? Object.pcode is undefined. So there is some issue. Let me also display, instead of get data, let me just display the object itself. So you get better idea what exactly has happened. You see this TV 1001, but there is TV itself. It is not P code, and that's why, because we do not have any P code like variable, it is not giving the data. Instead, it returns undefined. How can you make sure that this value of variable TV is assigned? What you have to do is you just put the key inside square brackets. The moment you put it in square bracket, object literal understands that this is a dynamic key. That means you are not supposed to take TV as a key. Rather, the value which is residing inside TV will be the actual key name. Let's try this again now. Now you see, instead of TV, now we have P code and 1001 is displayed. So this is something which is introduced in ES6. In fact, you may have different method like this. For example, I'll say get, then I join it and data. This is also valid. I'm just giving for the sake of showing the functionality. This can be a dynamic value, right? But right now, assume that we have two different values and you want to join. You may have two different variables which you may want to join for a method name or for a property name. Let's try this, whether it runs proper or not. You see this, it does say get data. So giving the dynamic key is possible because now we have the square bracket syntax to do this. There is also one more good facility available in ES6, which is called as property value shorthand. But that is one of our relative question. I'm going to discuss property shorthand feature in the relative question. So these were few syntax and tweaks we have seen about object literal. Now let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, can you have dynamic keys with object literal? Yes, we can have. We have already seen the last example where the key is not fixed, but it is referred by a variable. Even we saw that a method like get data, we tried to divide into two different values, then also it was valid. So of course, dynamic keys is absolutely allowed with square brackets. The next question is, how can you add read-only properties to an object? Now this is a very challenging question. The reason is we are using object, that is capital O object. Let's try a sample code for the same thing. I'm creating, let's say, a prototype. I'll say proto PR, or let's say proto itself, right? And I'll say object dot. There is a method called define property, not properties, property, where I have to pass an object literal if I have any object literal defined there. Otherwise, I can pass an empty object literal. Let's say I want to define a property named prop, and then I can define the configuration. That is, you see here it says attributes. Attributes means properties or attributes of the property which we are defining right now. For example, let me try P code itself. P code. Now, what I want about this property is that, is it writable? Yes, it is writable. That means one can change the property, right? Is it configurable? Yes, it is configurable. So I'll say true. What is the value of this property? I'll say 2001. Now, I'm going to create an object saying const obj is equal to object dot create. I'm creating the object and I'm passing the property. This is one property configuration. Proto contains the configuration of one key. That is one property. This is the key name and this is the value. But there are other settings also you can specify. Now object.create, I say proto. That means it's going to create an object with this configured property. Now I'll say console log, and before that, let me also try to assign, that is to change value P code to something else. Let's say I give 3001. That's it. So now the P code which we initialize with 2001, after creation we are changing it to 3001, and let me just refer the P code only. Let's see what happens. It says 3001. The value is changed. Now this writable, if I make it false like this, and then if I run, even though I assigned 3001, but it did not change. It remained 2001 because I mentioned that make it read only. So this is how you define the attributes of property, and you can manipulate with the object literal properties. Remember, if you are running this in the browser, it will give you error provided you are running it in a strict mode. But if you are not running in a strict mode, at least it will not change the value. Fine, it won't give any error. Like right now here, it is not showing any error. But if you have strict mode on, then certainly it will give error as well. So in short, yes, you can define read-only properties with define property method, which has several settings. Next question is, what is property value shorthand with object literal? Now this topic I just mentioned few minutes back, that this is a new feature introduced in ES6. Let me show you one example here. Again, I take product code 1001 and product name, which I give something like apple, my favorite. I'm talking about the fruit, not the electronic item. I'll say let obj is equal to, now see this. Imagine that this object has product code, and there you want to assign this value, that is P code, that is 1001. The point here is you want the value to be fetched from a variable. So you may write like this, P code is equal to P code. So the key is P code and the value is being fetched from this P code. Instead of this, ES6 gives you property value shorthand, that is P code. That's it. You do not need to write this colon. Just say P code. It means P code equals to P code, and I say P name is equal to P name. That means I don't write anything else. That's it. Let's check what is the object now. You see, the key is P code, value is 1001, which is being fetched from the variable. Similarly, we have P name and apple. So this is called as property value shorthand, where you do not need to write. You have both the left and right side values equal. Then you simply go with P code and P name here. The next question is, what will be the output of this code? The output of this code, let's try the code here. The code says that there is an object we are creating, and we are assigning this object, that is obj, to obj1. So when you are assigning the object, what actually happens is that the reference of the object is passed. So if you try to change obj1.a, then it does change the value of object 1, that is object itself. Why? Because here this will not create a new copy. This is not going to create a clone. It just creates the reference. So let's try this code. You see, so though obj.a was first, the output is second, even though you change obj1.a. So what actually happens in this case is that when you assign obj1 equals to obj, because the assignment is by reference, there is, you can imagine that a is separately located somewhere, and both obj and obj1 are sharing the same location because they are referring the address of a and not the value. So whenever you say obj.a or obj1.a, it's going to refer the very same location or variable. That's why, because of the reference copy, it is giving this output. In case if you want to have different objects, then this isn't the way to create a clone. This is not creating clone, in short. So if you want to create a clone, then that is our next question, which I'm going to discuss right now. So the next question is, how can we create a clone or a separate copy of an object literal? So let's take this example, and I want to create a clone.
One way is that you loop through all the properties, that is all the keys of object, and you assign to obj1, right? That is one way. But in ES6, we do also have object.assign method that will allow you to create the clone of one object literal. Let me change this code and we will try it. Instead of this, I will say object.assign. So the target object, you can write the object itself here. We are leaving it blank because this is also going to return the reference to, not exactly the reference, but the new copy to obj1. I want the copy of obj. Alright, now let's check the code. What happens? You see, now it says first.